Hello viewers, and a warm welcome to the show this evening. I am your host, Chef Andy, and very importantly, before I proceed, I do have a guest on the show today. As you can see, I will of course allow him to say a few words before I introduce the show and take you through the basics of the ingredients that we'll be working with. Preston?
Thank you. Hi guys, this is Preston J1. Preston J1 is basically this quirky person you can see, very off-center. Yeah, I am a film and TV producer, director, scriptwriter, and also a part-time designer, interior and fashion.
Thank you very much, Preston. Thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you, man.
Now, before we begin, I will of course introduce the dish for today. We're going to be making some chicken bhajia. And now for this recipe, you will of course incorporate some beautiful ingredients, which will of course entail about 1 tablespoon of cayenne pepper, about 1 teaspoon of taco spice, 1 teaspoon of cumin powder, and 1 teaspoon of jeera powder. You'll also require 1 whole egg and about 4 cloves of garlic, about two medium sizes of limes, fresh of course, some minced ginger, and 1 green chili. You'll also require some semolina flour, about 3 pieces of chicken breasts, grammaging to about 250 grams. You'll also require some fresh parsley, some peppercorns, and some salt for seasoning, some oil to fry your chicken in, and last but not least, some water to make your batter with. But before we begin, we'll give you this chance to sit back, relax, and unwind, and we'll catch you after a short break. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're just tuning in, you've pretty much missed out on very little. We began by introducing the ingredients, and of course we introduced the guest of today, whose name is Preston. He is an interior designer and of course music producer and a movie and TV and film and all that. Now, before I continue, maybe you can give the viewers maybe a little insight on what TV business and movie business is about. Maybe expound on what you do on the ground.
Yeah, basically TV and film is about creating stories through audio, visual. Yeah, so you're using picture and sound. So I tell stories that way. Yeah, and basically you start by writing. That's why I'm a writer. So you have to be creative and sometimes a word junkie. So basically that is it. And then in designing, I ventured into designing because when you do a film or you're doing a TV like you've done your show here, you have the guys who are doing the set. So I got the psych to do designing when I'm on set, and I'm like, I have to think about costume. So thinking about costume, why am I going to hire someone come do costume for me? I can think about costume. Need someone to make me a set out of nowhere, like a warehouse. Let's create a sitting room. So I was inspired from that. That's why I'm venturing into design.
Perfect. Now, on the same level of designing, we're of course going to also be designing a recipe, if I can use those words. Now we're going to be beginning our dish for today very simply. As I mentioned, we're going to be making a chicken bhajia, if you're just tuning in. Now, very important that before you begin any process of making chicken, very important that you also proceed to season it and chop it up. So I'm going to begin the process very simply by cutting up some chicken on the board. And while I do so, you're going to pretty much continue to make the batter that we'll be dipping our chicken into.
Right. So we're using the semolina flour?
So we're going to be using about half a cup of semolina flour. So you can add that into your bowl. Yes.
The entire...
Yes, all of it.
We have other semolinas that are white in color.
Yes, you do get a variety of semolina flour that's a little colored.
What's the difference?
Now, one particular thing is the semolina flours do come in different varieties. Now, for the one that we'll be focusing on the show today is, of course, a part mixture of semolina flour and gram flour, similar to the flour that you'd use for a bhajia. the local bhajias that you know. I think you've pretty much sampled the local bhajias.
I love coast dishes.
Exactly, the same coastal experience.
Yeah.
Now to that, we're also going to be incorporating a bit of some cayenne pepper.
Cayenne pepper. That is what is the measurement?
So we're using about a teaspoon of cayenne.
All right.
We're also going to be using a teaspoon of taco spice. Also a teaspoon of some cumin powder. And last but not least, a teaspoon of some jeera powder. Now, very, very important, before you proceed to add your liquid, you begin by just mixing the flour together. This is, of course, to make sure that we have the seasoning evenly distributed in the mixture.
So that.
Then we'll, of course, season that with a bit of salt.
Yeah.
Crush in some black peppercorns. This is, of course, just to complement on the flavor. We're also going to add a small dash of oil, about a teaspoon as well. And then, of course, the last and final ingredient to that will be a bit of water. So I always recommend add your water in small amounts. This way your batter will, of course, get a beautiful consistency.
Right.
And it also allows for you to make sure that you also don't have too much water at once. Of course, if you have too much water, this would mean you'd have to start the process from the beginning. Yeah.
So basically, that is the essence of when you're using flour. You know, the mistakes I've been doing, and I realized is I do water first before I do the flour, and then you realize you don't have enough flour.
Then that's what happens. Now, the best way to make sure that this doesn't occur, always make sure to have. On most occasions, you may not have enough flour, or you may run out of flour if you're making a bigger quantity. So my utmost recommendation is always start with your flour for two reasons. Yeah. Remember, your flour is, of course, your component. It's a main component in your mixture. Yeah. Water may not run out of in many occasions, but very, very importantly as well, as also something to remember when you're mixing a dough or mixing any particular batter. Always be sure to also make sure to have an excess, maybe a little bit of excess of the batter mixture. So if you're going to maybe look at a recipe that calls for 1 cup, make sure you have 2 before you even begin. Yeah. Because something else that also happens on some occasions, you may also have the batter that you mixed in the first setup, on the first stage, can actually run out. So very, very important that you make sure that you have quite a bit of adequate flours and the seasonings, just to make sure you don't run out.
All right.
And now to that, we're also going to be adding a bit of some freshly chopped parsley. Now this does 2 things. It's going to also give it a nice, beautiful color. So it's going to give it some beautiful sparks of green. And it also brings a very, very beautiful nutty taste to the dish. So in goes your parsley. And of course, very important, make sure to discard the stems. Yeah. And as Preston does so, I'm also going to turn over to a clean side on my chopping board. And all you need to do now is cut up your chicken into some sizable chunks. So very, very simply, by using a sharp knife, proceed to slice those into some 1-inch chunks. Now, something also very important to remember when slicing your chicken for this recipe, always make sure that the chunks are evenly cut. Yeah. This is, of course, to make sure that you don't have some pieces cooking faster than others. And another thing that also happens on most occasions is you can actually end up having some pieces that are not fully cooked to the center. And also a very, very important thing to share, also make sure that your meat is completely defrosted. So don't attempt to make maybe chicken, exactly, when it's still frozen. You may, of course, also encounter situations that it's also not cooked through to the center.
Is it a rule to cut meat against the grains?
Actually, it is. I would always suggest, if you're going to be cutting meat, for instance, red meat, very important that you remember the angle at which you cut, maybe along or across the grain. It also pretty much depends on what you'll be doing with it. Yeah. So for instance, if you're going to be cutting strips, maybe if you're going to be cooking some meat and you want those long strips, cut that along the grain. But when you cut across the grain, this would basically be anything in relation to steaks or chunks that you want to look like steaks kind of sizes. So those you can actually cut across the grain or even at a diagonal angle. This also pretty much makes sure that you also have a beautiful appearance when you cut it. So it doesn't actually look very, very flat. It actually has a bit of an angle to it. Yeah. And the beautiful thing is it's pretty much also going to look very nicely on the plate as soon as you plate it.
Yes, even when you're cutting and it gives
exactly. It gives you an easy time of cutting, yeah. Right, so just to finish that off, now very important that I also remind you, on many occasions some of us may also tend to forget to season our meat before it actually goes into the butter.
Yeah.
So we're going to be doing a very, very simple marinade for that. So I'm going to just set the butter on the side. And to that, I'm also going to give you a big spoon. Now we're going to begin the process of the marinade by adding about 2 tablespoons of oil to a mixing bowl. And to that, we're also going to add some freshly grated ginger. Yeah. So you can also use ginger powder for this recipe. And all you need to do is add the rest of your seasoning, beginning with a bit of some cumin and some garam masala. Add your taco spice as well. And this is basically just to make sure that you have the same flavor carrying through the dish from the inside where the chicken is actually tasteful to the outside where you actually have the butter. And now to that, we're also going to be incorporating some garlic. So I'm going to be using a garlic press for this process. Yes. You can of course chop the garlic very, very finely with a knife, or you can also use a pestle. Yeah, even grating actually is a very, very good idea. Now remember, for most occasions, especially if you're going to be making a marination, grating also is a very, very good alternative for the fact that it actually allows for you to get the maximum flavor out of your mixture. Yes. And now to add the last and final piece of our garlic.
So you've used 4 cloves?
I've used 4 cloves, yeah. So very simply with a knife, proceed to clean any bit of garlic still sticking out of your press. So you can proceed to give that a mix as we add the last and final ingredients to that, which is a bit of salt. But very important to make sure, always be very vigilant in not adding too much salt at this stage, because you also have a bit of salt in the butter.
Yeah, true that.
And of course, just to finish that off, a bit of some fresh limes always brings a very, very good sharpness to a marination. So I'm just going to press some limes through a sieve. This of course to make sure that you don't have any seeds. And just proceed to mix your marination. So we're basically going to allow the chicken to rest for about an hour. And then we'll proceed to coat that in the butter mixture and then proceed to fry. Right, so basically once your marination is done, all you need to do now is incorporate your chicken.
Looks like it's ready to eat.
Now this is pretty much going to be a while. We're going to give it quite a bit of time. Now something also I can share for some of you who are also looking at saving time, you can also throw your ingredients in a blender. It'll of course give you a more consistent paste, and it'll actually save you the effort of mincing everything or cutting everything individually.
So you, all of them together?
Everything together.
Throw them in a blender?
Exactly.
Then you have your 45 seconds to 1 minute.
Yeah, 45 seconds to 1 hour. Or even for the best results, I always recommend if you can actually also marinate your chicken a day before. Leave it in the refrigerator overnight. It's also going to give a very, very good and fulfilling result.
It allows greater marination.
And it allows the flavors to really marinate in there proper. Right, so as we finish this off, I will of course take you to the next step of our dish, which is of course the coating and the frying. But before we do so, we are going to take a very, very quick break, giving us some time to clean up the station. But when we do come back, I will take you through the very, very simple process of coating your chicken in butter and proceeding to the last and final stage, which is the frying. And we'll of course also take you straight to the plating right after that, where I'm also going to be showing you some very, very beautiful serving suggestions. And I'm also going to be giving you some simple additions to this very simple recipe. So please don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. If you're with us just before the break, we pretty much managed to marinate our chicken, which is already in the fridge. I do have a separate batch here that was marinated a little earlier, and this is a batch that we're actually going to be cooking. Now this of course marinates for about an hour to 2 hours, but you can of course marinate this overnight. It will of course make the process much easier for you. It will of course save you time, and most of all, it will of course also give a very much more profound flavor as opposed to cooking it directly from the marination. Now, Preston, we're going to begin the next step very simply. So to the batter that we had whipped up a little earlier, we're going to be adding 1 egg. Now the beautiful thing about the egg, it actually gives the batter a bit of a weight, and it's basically going to make the batter a little much more heavier for us to be able to coat the chicken in.
Sure.
Now on many occasions you'd probably have the chicken go into a bit of flour, then into the batter. But the egg will of course save us the process of incorporating flour. And as you had also mentioned, you're also a person that is very much gluten free. You pretty much base on your meals on no gluten at all.
No gluten, yeah.
So this particular technique actually is one of the best ones that you can also use. Now in place of using flour, which would have used to coat the chicken again and then into the butter and into the oil, the egg will basically do the same process. Wow. Yeah. So we're going to start off this very simple process by dipping our pieces of chicken into the butter.
Can I put the whisk away?
Yes, I can actually take that away.
So I'm putting piece.
So you're going to go piece by piece, making sure to toss it nice and gently into the butter. And then once you're done, you'll just lift it off the bowl, allow the excess marination to drop completely, and then proceed to add that into some oil. Now, just to mention, the oil is already preheated. We pretty much allowed that to heat up very briefly, so it should actually be at about 160 on beginning. This is of course to also make sure that your chicken begins to cook very gradually from the inside, and it colors gradually on the outside as it continues to cook to its full stage.
Are we ready to drop it?
So you can drop the first piece. Now something also very important to mention at this stage, also have a piece of some kitchen towel or some serviettes to be able to drain your chicken in as soon as they come out of the oil. And this of course will also aid in allowing for the chicken to cool off very briefly before you proceed on to the plating stage of the process. Right, so also to mention, very simple technique of marinating, but do remember there are very many different alternatives you can try out at home. As I mentioned, we basically use the one simple one that we can actually incorporate into a bhajia mixture. But remember, there are very varied varieties of spices that you can also incorporate. And if you're also looking at giving it much of a spicy kind of aftertaste, you can of course double up on the spice quantity by moving it from 1 teaspoon to 2 teaspoons or even 3 to give it a more profound spice and a kick flavor to it. Now, very important to also mention that we're also going to be adding very small amounts of chicken at a time.
So this
is of course, yeah, that can actually work for now. And this is basically to allow for the oil to not also cool down too quickly, and that all the chicken is actually cooked and the heat is transparent right through each side of the chicken piece.
So when do I start turning them?
So we're going to allow that to pretty much cook until the sides start turning golden brown. So you know what happens is it cooks from the outside in.
Yeah.
So as soon as you see a ring of gold or almost dark brown on the side, you can basically turn those over. Yes. Now something also maybe to share with you viewers, if you haven't mentioned, I do have Preston with me in studios today. He's of course in a very different field compared to mine. He's in the movies and the industry that basically revolves around production and creativity.
Yes,
so maybe you can also point or share some views maybe with some viewers at home, maybe guests or maybe even young kids out there who are maybe interested in your line of work. What could you maybe suggest to them?
I would say I'm pretty much home, because you know, film production, TV, just like what a chef does. You have to go to the farm, come up with the right ingredients.
Exactly.
But before you do that, in your mind you have a food you think you're going to make that day. Let's say you want to make a breakfast. What do I want to serve for my breakfast? You have, say you want an English breakfast. What comes to your mind? There is the kidney beans, there's an egg, there's a sausage, and that, and there is the tea.
Exactly.
So when you have a concept, now you go to the grocery and pick your ingredients. So film, TV, it's all about that. Just have a concept in this manner. It's the English breakfast, and then how do you treat it? And then I come with a treatment. Treatment is now putting up all my ingredients together and how I'm going to cook them. So basically, film is about creativity, having an idea, putting it down on paper, and then later assemble a team, equipment, cameras, sound equipment, and the team, and then you go out and then you shoot.
So maybe I can also direct another question to you. Getting into the movie and film industry, was it a passion from birth, or were you influenced by maybe a peer in your stages of growth, or how did it begin?
Fun, when you join high school and you are asked what you want to do.
Exactly.
So I think I'm the only person in my school who said what they want to do, and they ended up doing that. But in between, I was not supposed to do this. So here is I'm done with college, and then you have to do computer packages, however much you know computer, Kenya.
Because this is the market we walk into, basically.
And then I go. My mom secures me an admission into utalii. Sorry.
So
are we supposed to mention names?
Yeah.
So
you
she
can
secures me.
mention it,
She secures me an admission. Yeah, and then I'm supposed to be joining, I think, and then I don't join. Then I go to see my friends, the ones we were in school with. They tell me, I'm here, studying here and there. And then I'm like, okay, let me come visit you. And I go there, and then I see the studio, the cameras, and I'm like, it's more fun. I went home and told my mom I'm not going for the food and beverage course. I want to
go into production.
So that's how I went into it, and I love it. It's super much fun.
All right.
Super much fun.
And maybe for those of you who are maybe keen on getting into the industry, maybe is there some challenges you encountered through your process, or maybe some eye-openers that you wish maybe you knew before you walked into the industry that you may share with those who are coming into it?
The eye-opener is, guys, when you're going to venture out and you want to do film, you want to do TV, everyone, when we are growing up, you're told you're going to do mass communication. You're going to be on TV. Sorry. Not everyone goes on TV. Even if you went and did broadcast journalism, you won't be on TV. The challenge is this: if you're not creative, you're not surviving in this industry. This industry needs creative people. You're thinking all the time. You're coming up with ideas all the time. Even news. News is people watching the creative news features. So however much news is just basic, let's go shoot these stories developing, but what angle will make it exciting?
And you actually have to encompass the factor that you're also teaching and you're entertaining, and you have to basically marry the two ideas together.
Inform, educate, entertain. So, and also film is, we have so many films that are touching, let's say, the Rwandan genocide, but there's that one that stands out. We have so many films about Idi Amin Dada.
It's true.
But
it's true.
The Last King of Scotland stands out because of the creativity the producer had. So you can do the same idea, but how you cook. Everyone cooks chicken at home, right?
Exactly.
But how do you do it?
But the touch that I incorporate into my chicken is of course different from something someone else will do.
It's just being outside the box, coming up with the new ideas, new ingredients, just the way you're doing it. That is what is giving you edge over the other person. So film and TV is basically that. It's also design. Design is thinking without your mind, with the other person's mind. Just think with your mind and don't confine yourself to anything. All right.
That's a very, very good pointer. Now, maybe you also have some different techniques of how you make your own chicken based on what we've done on the show today. Is there something you'd say that you've learned that is new to you?
Yeah,
that you can try out at home?
I've learned several things. Yeah.
Maybe it's in the ingredients.
The parsley.
The parsley, yeah.
Then the egg. I always found an egg and chicken like not going together. But today I've seen how you can do it better.
You basically managed to see that you can incorporate the two into one dish. Yeah. Now something also maybe I can share with you on the egg that we added.
Yes.
Remember also, if you're going to be serving or making this dish for someone maybe other than yourself that doesn't have, or maybe is not a consumer of eggs, you can actually avoid adding the eggs, and you can actually incorporate maybe just a little bit of some rice flour or some potato flour. So this particular different flours are also, they're not as gluten, they don't contain a big content of gluten like wheat flour would. So you can actually be able to try different flours as well.
Oh, that's nice.
Exactly. Right, now as we narrow down to finishing this off, yeah, so we can turn them once more just to give a look and make sure they're cooking through perfectly. Ooh, and of course, once you've got that beautiful golden touch to your chicken, this pretty much gives you the leeway to proceed to remove those from the heat and proceed to allow to cool them off on some parchment paper. So you can lift those very simply, allow them to drain the excess oil and then transfer them here. And we'll just pretty much repeat the same process right up until the chicken is completely done. But because we're also going to be making just a little bit of the portions that we have on the show today, yes, I will of course also take you through the last and final part of the plating. So very, very important that I also suggest, if you're looking at some good alternatives to serve with your bhajia, remember the sauces are endless. Some of us do prefer chutneys, some prefer marmalades, and some prefer sauces. So for this particular recipe, I'm going to be suggesting some tamarind sauce. Now this you can be able to find in the shops already ready-made, yes, but if you're of course looking at making it yourself, we do have some episodes that we covered some time back in the show, and you can actually be able to depict a very, very simple recipe there to make your own tamarind sauce from home. Ah. Right, now,
so all we need to do... Are we switching it, or are we still...
No, we're going to add these few pieces as we continue to finish off onto plating. And while Preston does so, very, very importantly, I'm going to also prepare the rest of the ingredients that we'll be incorporating to our dish. So I'm also going to be adding some fresh green chili. Very important to mention, if you're of course not looking at making it very, very hot, begin by taking out the seeds completely using a sharp knife. And a very, very strong point as well, maybe if I haven't shared with you on the show, if you're looking at making a mixture, if you're looking at making a dish or incorporating some fresh chilies into a dish, you can always be able to control the heat factor to your dish by taking out the seeds. This will of course make the chili a little less hot and a little more tasty. But if you're of course really trying to venture into giving it a real kick of heat, you can of course incorporate your whole chili in there. But very important to mention, if you're going to be serving the meal to some tinders or some kids, be sure to also make sure to have the chilies on the side. That way you can actually be able to entertain your whole sitting at one go. So just to take off a bit of the seeds from that last piece. Very importantly, also make sure to remove the seeds completely from your chopping board. Sometimes you do have instances where your seeds can actually fall into the mixture. And all we need to do now is proceed to chop our chili very, very finely. And now, as I mentioned, this is basically just the little nitty-gritties that you can actually incorporate on the plating stage of your dish. You can, of course, try your own different techniques if you prefer. And to that, I'm also going to be incorporating a bit of some fresh lime. But very, very importantly, also make sure to remove the seeds from your lime before proceeding to plate. Remember, this sometimes do fall into the dish, and you may, of course, try really, really hard to get them out. Yeah. So it's a very, very simple technique. Using a sharp knife, just proceed to core out any visible seeds that are visible to the eye and proceed to discard those. And of course, if you're also looking at giving it a nice, beautiful finish, you can also incorporate some beautiful sprigs of some fresh parsley, which is of course also going to carry in a bit of flavor and giving a nice, beautiful appearance in general. So of course, as we finish this off, very important that I mention, we are going to fry this a little later just to finish them off. Yes. But for instance, if you're making the chicken the same way at home, you can basically be able to freeze the chicken and you can defrost it and cook it at a later stage. It is of course also going to have a bit more concentrate to flavor to it. But something also to mention with the butter, yes, if you're going to be making this maybe on a day like today, be sure and also not to keep the butter with you, because it also contains a bit of some of the juices from the raw chicken. And this can actually be able to carry in a bit of some semolina, which will of course poison you. So very, very important to mention, if you're going to be making your butter, and maybe if you're not sure of using the whole amount, you can of course portion a little bit and save it on the side, and maybe use it with a little bit of chicken left over. And of course, also to mention, for the chicken that you marinated, this can actually stay even up to a week in a freezer.
The chicken, is one allowed to use soy sauce in this recipe?
You can actually incorporate soy sauce, yes, but a pointer that I can share, if you're going to add soy sauce, be very light with the salt. That way you don't actually have too much of the iodine flavor.
Salty, yeah?
And the soy sauce is salty as well.
Yeah.
Right, so we can take those pieces out as well. Those are also done. And now, as I mentioned, very, very simple technique. This particular dish can, of course, serve very, very many different purposes. You can, of course, be able maybe to serve it with your starch of choice. You can also alternatively just serve it as a biting on its own. And also just to share a small suggestion, if you're also going to be making it for vegetarians, remember you can actually use some beautiful array of vegetables that can actually go into the batter as well. But be sure to dust them with a bit of flour and steam them for about 1 to 2 minutes. This is, of course, to make sure that you also don't have raw vegetables at the end of your cooking process.
Are we switching it off?
Now you can switch that off. And now all that we're left to do is basically proceed to move these onto the plate. So all we're going to do is dump them very, very lightly with a bit of our serviette. This is, of course, to make sure that we've reduced the oil completely. And all you're left to do is proceed to move those onto your plate of choice. Making sure, of course, that they're also nice and crispy when serving.
They say we start eating with the eyes.
Exactly.
So plating is very important.
And very, very importantly, your plating will, of course, always be your biggest ally. But of course, before I finish this off, I will allow for you to give the chicken a bit of a taste, just to make sure the flavor is where we desired it to be. How's the flavor?
This is awesome.
Perfect. So I'm hoping you're going to actually try this out at home. Yeah?
I must.
Perfect.
I must.
Now, of
Actually,
course,
this one it's very easy to achieve at home. Super easy.
and of course, just to mention, most of the ingredients are easy to purchase. For the spices, you can be able to find all those spices that we use at the supermarkets.
In our local groceries.
Exactly.
Even, yeah.
And of course, if you're also looking at keeping it nice and hearty, you can also avoid using the processed spices. And you can actually maybe incorporate some ginger and some garlic alone, some salt and pepper. And you'll actually be able to get the beautiful richness of those fresh vegetables. Right, now just to finish that off, some sprigs of some parsley right over the top, a bit of some tamarind sauce to be able to taste by. Also add just 2 pieces of some lime at the side there to basically squeeze onto the chicken, and drizzle some of your beautifully chopped chilies over the top. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the last and final part of the show. I will thank you once again for tuning in to the show today and, of course, showing your support. But do remember, you can be able to share your views by writing back to us through our Facebook page. That's BrandPlus TV Kenya. Do leave your comments, suggestions, or any particular queries that may actually aid in making the show a little better. Now, something I can also leave you with, a very, very small message which I'll allow Preston to do, and it's basically to give you an insight of how you can also be able to join us on the show as a guest. So Preston, maybe you can do us the honors.
Yeah, it's an honor to be on this show.
Thank you very much.
I think great insights. So, as a fan of this show, what you need to do, you see the code on your screen, just send your details there. Send your details, SMS your details, where you are from, your location, what you love about the show, what you want to learn about. Yeah, these guys are super ASAP at getting back at you, and then you're called here, then you can be part of this beautiful set. I really enjoyed. I can't wait for the cameras to go off so that I can hawk.
Thank you, Preston. So from us here at Studios, thank you once again for tuning in. Do stay blessed, and until the next episode of Dinner Guide, do have a lovely evening and see you soon.
Bye.